I'm here with David Smooke, the founder and CEO of HackerNoon, which is an independent publication on tech news, and it is getting a lot of viewers each month, about 1 million, right?
1 to 2 million people.
1 to 2
8
million.
million page views.
Wow, that's a lot. That's really cool.
Yeah, it's funny to think about them in one room, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, that's past the point where I can even really imagine it. So that must feel really good. How long have you been working on HackerNoon for?
Well, I've been working on this company for over 3 years now.
Okay.
So it's been, HackerNoon itself started January 2016 as the Hacker Daily, and then it became HackerNoon in April 2016.
Okay.
And that's kind of the path we took to, making it a safe place for people to publish.
That's incredibly fast for that many users. Or
It doesn't feel like it every day. You just keep working on it, and then suddenly 3 years pass, and you're a little grayer, a little more wrinkles.
Yeah. So, did this start as like a side hustle, or was it always intentional to have this be like?
It was definitely a side hustle. Oh yeah. So
Okay.
It was the original company was actually called ArtMap Inc., and we were a marketing service for startups, and we would tell the story of startups. And my goal was really just to work with the best entrepreneurs I knew.
Okay.
And I also saw a split happening between how people are compensated, where I believed equity should be a higher stake of early startup employees. So every client I worked with, I took equity in their company. But we started actually 16 different publications at once. And
Wow.
it was originally like, hey, we need a corporate blog, and we just want to publish these cool creative people. And then HackerNoon emerged as like the most interesting one and the thing that resonated with people. And so we just kept feeding it. We were making money from basically marketing startups and pouring it into HackerNoon.
Wow. Okay, there's a lot in there that I wasn't aware of, and it sounds really cool. So I want to backtrack a bit. Was your background always in marketing?
So my degrees in school were in economics and creative writing.
Oh, cool.
So marketing kind of like people in marketing wanted to hire me more than I was attracted to marketing.
Okay.
Which is like how really, when you enter the labor force, that's how it works.
And so how did you get pushed toward tech companies and marketing for tech companies?
So I was a newspaper reporter in Lewistown, Pennsylvania after college. Then I thought Lewistown, Pennsylvania, it's like a 15,000 person town. The whole county, I think, is 70,000. And there's not that much going on. It's like Friday night hangouts are like the Major League bar, which like still has smoking to this day. It's just one of those old bars in a small town in like Dunkin' Donuts. So there's just not many things. So I had friends in San Francisco, so I decided to move across the country. And I had basically saved enough money for like 3 months of rent-ish.
Okay.
So that was kind of my window to like, hey, are you capable of making money?
Yeah.
Which I am.
understand
I am
that.
capable of making money.
Yeah.
Sometimes you don't know it, but it's true.
That's the early roots of Era as well, actually. It was like it might have been 6-month runway. I'm getting fuzzy on it now, but it was pretty short time. Like, okay, well.
6 months happens fast.
Oh my gosh. When you're trying to run a startup,
Yeah.
it's nothing.
The phrase is like you underestimate what you can do in 10 years, but you overestimate what you can do in a year.
Yeah.
Like a year can also happen really fast.
Yeah, absolutely. So did you grow up in Pennsylvania? Why were you?
I did. I grew up in Lewistown, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
So it's in Happy Valley. Mifflin County is the county. So you're about 30 minutes from Penn State, and then the rest of it is mostly farms, a lot of farmland, a lot of rolling hills. It's like a ridge and valley region, so like up and down. Biking is fun. Lots of baseball, lots of football.
So
Very
what was
red.
it like to move from sort of the small town feel to San Francisco with a startup that you were trying to get off the ground in 3 months?
Well, I actually ended up joining another company when I moved to San Francisco because like I wasn't at the time capable of having all the infrastructure and doing it myself. I didn't know. I didn't know how a business actually worked, which I still probably don't, but I know enough that it like makes more money than it spends, which is really the key to any decent business.
Yeah.
In the short term, you can always spend more money and lose money, but it doesn't work in the long run.
Yeah. Okay, so tell me then, that other business, that wasn't ArtMap Inc., because that was what you founded, right?
Yeah.
So what?
So for 3.5 years, I was at a company called Smart Recruiters.
Okay.
So they came to market with a free recruiting software, and we're trying to replace the applicant tracking system in all these big and small businesses. And that company, I joined, it was 5 people. When I left, it was about 130, 120, 130, somewhere in there. So I saw this high growth, Series A, Series B type of way to grow a company, which is very interesting, and it was really rewarding. But I've soured a little bit on like the structure of like Series A, Series B, because it seems to me these startups become a little too much like subsidiaries of the venture capital firm, as opposed to a business that makes choices for the best sake of the business.
So for people who aren't familiar with like raising money on that side of things in the startup world, what are Series A and Series B, and what do you mean by the companies becoming kind of beholden to these venture capitalists instead of their own business?
Yeah, so the way I understand it, the traditional Silicon Valley model is you'll go seed funding, then Series A, Series B, Series D, Series C, Series E, Series F, Series G, Series H, Series I, Series J, Series K, and then at some point there's something called a public offering that really it should come after Series C, after 3 rounds, but companies just keep going. But there's the deeper you, and I say this from the perspective, the only money I've taken on, we've raised from our readers, and we've done equity crowdfunding. I've never done Series A and Series B. When it's been other companies I've worked with, I have not been the lead on those things. So this is more my perspective from sitting in the back seat, as opposed to actually driving the car. But every time you raise a round, you basically give up 20% of your company, and you have all these conditions attached to the money. Like one of the awful ones that anyone that's done it before knows it. Anyone that hasn't probably doesn't know it, and it's the liquidity preference. They'll come in, they're like, oh, I raised a $5 million Series A, and they'll have a 3x liquidity preference. It's like, well, unless you sell that thing for $15 million or more, you're going to get $0 for everything you've done.
So what is liquidity preference?
So liquidity preference is who gets paid first.
Okay.
So the venture capitalists will get paid first, and they'll put a multiplier on it. And so
it's just referring to like preferred stock, common stock, that type of a thing?
Essentially, if you can own more than 20% while owning 20%. If you have a liquidity preference, if you raise $5 million and you give a 2x liquidity preference to someone and you sell it for $10 million, even though you own 80%, you won't get $1 because their 2x liquidity preference will come first. The venture capitalists will get paid first. And then you'll be like, I built something worth $10 million. And you'll be like, well, your bank account's empty.
Yeah.
That sucks.
Okay. So then back to, from your perspective, people are raising money, they're not paying enough attention to liquidity preference, and what happens?
I don't know, because I avoided it. At that point, I was like, I don't want to be involved in business like that. So I don't want to go too far down the road because I didn't do it, know. But there's a reason venture capitalists keeps having the returns they do. And a lot of it just come back to the terms. What terms do they actually set with the businesses they're working with, as opposed to, hey, I can definitely find the next Uber. Well, even if you find the next Uber, if you didn't put very much in it, it's not going to carry the whole fund. So it's they're some of the smartest people out there. Venture capital keeps plucking, oh, you're a good entrepreneur, why don't you come to the other side? So I think it's there's a reason they keep winning. And so it's a good business to get into. It's just not good for my business.
Okay. So how did you move now from, can you tell me the story behind moving from the recruiting company and now to starting ArtMap Inc.? What was the jump there? Yeah,
I was a little burnt out. So it was 3.5 years in a pretty high stress environment and very difficult work. And just creating a brand from nothing is like, there's so many stupid little things you end up doing. Like, why am I printing T-shirts? Like,
you say if you're wearing your T-shirt.
I know. Why am I running around everywhere? So I really didn't know I just know I needed a change. So listen to myself, listen to when I needed to evolve and change. And I just said I'll work, I don't want to work for any one person, so I'll take on customers, and I'll try and get the best entrepreneurs I know and learn from them as my customers. So that was kind of the model, but it was always more interesting to have a place where where the stories are actually the work versus the stories are the work to create the lead. So it's a very different, it's simple, but it's very different. So having the stories be the work itself I saw the path I wanted to go to. So it was more like, how do I level off the customers I have and make it so it's enough money to function, and then every single month take less and less of that time and put it more and more into the publications. So that was kind of the trade-off I made, which was, it's really money's coming from one place, you're spending it on something else isn't making money yet, you believe it'll make money soon. So that was the trade-off. And then it starts with selling some newsletter sponsorships. And then it starts with selling, some top navigation sponsorships where the thing, just having your brand atop the thing is the thing that I'm selling, as opposed to, let me see how big I can make your brand and your story. And eventually we hit kind of a sweet spot where as Hacker Noon started to grow, and we built what was called a weekly sponsorship. And it was very simple, co-branding across the top of the site.
And that's on Medium, or was this somewhere else at that point?
So it's on hackernoon.com,
okay.
Powered by Medium's technology, Medium software, which was a questionable trade-off that I made in working with Medium.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to hear about that, though, because at some point, so when you started ArtMap Inc., you said you had 16 different publications, right? And all 16 were on Medium at that point?
Most were on Medium. I was running some other sites with WordPress, and WordPress is what I used with smart recruiters and building their blog and publishing with them. So, I'm pretty familiar with both. And I wish, Medium continued competing with WordPress and put their sites on like powering many other people's sites and empowering many publications like mine and many others to start versus, trying to get everyone to publish on medium.com, which is what they're doing today.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to get into that, but I still, before we go too far astray from me just trying to understand sort of this marketing business that you started, I think that's fascinating. I had no idea that Hacker Noon started out as like a marketing company, basically. So tell me.
Well, it's more like a side project of something that made money from their marketing company. It was never like the intention that it would like exist and grow because it was like marketing something.
Yeah.
It was more just like we created interesting things. Sometimes we created things that we didn't have clients for, and we just kept making them.
Yeah. Okay, so walk me through, because I'm very unfamiliar with the world of marketing. Walk me through what kind of the idea was for that point in time before Hacker Noon took off and kind of became the bread and butter.
Essentially the early customers shaped the idea of the company because it was like, what do you want to pay me for? Let's talk it out and let's make a contract. Because a lot of my initial customers were basically people that wanted to hire me full time, which I was unwilling to do. I just wasn't willing to go all in on some other person's idea at that time. So.
And they were wanting to hire you in the capacity of being a marketer, right? Not a journalist, not...
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because that was the last job. But it was more like the metrics would be site authority, site traffic. So it's like similar to publishing of the challenge they actually wanted me to do. Like creating a name, defining what it is in 3 words, defining what it is in a sentence, defining what you are in a paragraph. Like a lot of this identity stuff that's like... It is marketing, and if you have good identity, it's much easier for you to go different places and market yourself. If you have strong identity, the moment you create a profile on a new site, people are interested because your identity is strong, and your identity is something someone can relate to and grab onto. And it's also like a measure of how good is your brand around the whole web. If I just enter a new community as Hacker Noon, will people just follow it? Sometimes they don't. Because how big is it? Is it big enough that it can immediately be followed? But the way I was structuring the contracts were basically 6-month contracts. I just took the 4-year traditional thing of a startup employee and cut it down to 6 months. So the vesting cliff was once per month for 6 months. 20 to 25% of the contract would be in stock, and the other 75% of the contract or so was in cash. And we would agree on what we wanted to build, and I would work on it.
So what kinds of things would you build?
So messaging identity, so we'd go through identity exercises of who you are. Then it was building out your editorial calendar, building out your blog, coming up with your SEO strategy, coming up where you're going to publish around the web, and just the whole point was, scaling the narrative and taking your narrative from what it was to what it could be around the rest of the internet.
So it sounds like marketing, when I naively think about marketing, I think about advertising as my first thing, as my first thought. But it sounds like marketing is actually a lot more of a strategic exercise, that it's really more about strategizing.
If you don't know who you are, it totally is. Because whenever you're hired to a larger company and you're buying ad dollars, your job is managing an ad budget. And your job is to manage how many impressions, how many clicks did you get from the ad budget. Your job isn't to change what the thing is. Because you're already at IBM. IBM is IBM. So you're not changing what it is. So with what we were doing, we were defining and changing who these people were and what their companies were and what their companies were going to do. The early stage it's a much different animal than trying to just buy ad dollars.
So, how do you do that? Do they come in with an end goal in mind? Like, our goal is just to make buckets of money. Our goal is to create this type of a technology. How does that work?
They definitely have their ideas in mind. And then there's like a thing between like reality and where you want to be. And you need some quality reality distortion to get where you want to be. Like, you can't just accept reality for what it is, but you also need to be, sometimes it's just coaching and management of the person of like, I know you want to be that, and I know maybe in 3 years you could be that. What you are is not that. You have to be realistic about what you are and what you can offer someone today, and balance that with like what you want to be. So the branding exercises are somewhat useful, but a lot of it is just, I think a lot of the barriers for these smaller companies is they just need to find a way to keep telling their story and reduce the barriers of the amount of work they have to put in to publish. And then when they do that, they get closer to actually understanding who they are, because they get to like a volume of content and a volume of data.
And what do you mean by understanding who they are in order to publish? Are you talking about like publishing in big journals and
I'm
outlets,
saying
or?
Like all their social media updates, all their blogs, and then other people's blogs, and maybe getting to the bigger journals.
Okay.
But I think the young entrepreneurs are better off publishing something small each day than trying to spend 2 weeks getting in the BBC or CNET or whoever their target is. I think they're smarter to just, how do I reduce the barriers for me to get something out each day? And each day I can, share more of my story and my ideas, and that will attract more people that are interested in those ideas too.
Okay, so I'm not sure like what your contracts and non-disclosure agreements might be, but can you tell me about sort of your favorite project from that stage in your business of like, okay, you took on this startup, you helped them craft their identity, you had a strategy for getting them known and out in the world, and it was fairly successful. Do you have an example or story for that?
I wasn't like a hit venture capital firm. Like, I don't have any Ubers in my 9-month portfolio of this phase of my career. But my favorite one was probably Teamable. They were Armenian. 3 out of 4, well, all 4 of the founders are Armenian. One's Armenian American. So they're also a tale of like a country that isn't as wealthy rising up through tech startups. And they ended up raising a $5 million Series A from one of these Silicon Valley firms, and so they're in the employee referrals and the recruiting space, and just like really good people, like very smart, intelligent people, and there's no reason like this company shouldn't become much bigger, and I am a shareholder, small tiny shares.
Disclosure. Yeah, okay. So how did that work? They came to you and said, at that point, did they have an identity, as you've been calling it?
They did some. Yeah, we got better with it, and they're probably better at it now without me. It's been years.
So what was the strategy? I'm here asking selfishly too, because I'm a part of a small startup. Mm-hmm. So how did they move from just being at the beginning and needing to hire a David Smooke to
Well, see, that there was the interesting thing about them, and this is why startups are cool and also very frustrating, is I actually balance my time like marketing and sales because of the necessity of the company. So it's kind of like a lot of their challenges, they needed big brands to sell against. When you're brand new and you're trying to sell something new, it's much easier to do it if Lyft is also using the software. And then you get Lyft, and now you go after these other companies that are like Lyft. Mm-hmm. So their challenge was kind of split, because if you put too much on creation, identity, content, but you don't have someone selling against the content, the balance of the team is wrong. So in that case, I stepped up and did some sales, not because that's what I want to do, but because that's what's needed to be done. And then come back to, telling more of the story and working on a publishing calendar and stuff like that. So that whenever there's only 5 or 6 people in the room, if you identify one of the things you need to do is outside the skill set of those 5 or 6 people, it's best that you either find someone or one of you just steps up and does it. And if you're able to do that, the whole team is going to move forward. And if you're not, you're just going to have great marketing content and not enough sales. And if your product needs a salesman to sell, it doesn't matter how good the marketing is. If your product can be sold without sales, that's a rare thing.
Yeah, so that's the paradox though, right? How a mentor who's also a business professor I was talking to him, he was saying that early startups often have he called it the legitimacy paradox, where it's like, in order for somebody to start purchasing your product, they want to see that you already have customers. But it's like breaking into the job market. Everybody wants to see that you have experience. Well, how do you get that first experience? Same thing with sales and to some extent marketing, because it seems like there's sort of these, I'm not sure what the right word is, but sort of this magnetic effect of once you've been published about in some big journal or platform, then all the other ones will follow like sheep. But how do you get your foot in the door? So
Hacker Noon.
Okay, Hacker Noon. Well, this is the perfect transition then. So tell me a little bit about how Hacker Noon started to take off among the 16 sort of publications. Well, actually, you know what? I'm going to back up even further. Can you connect the dots for me? Like, I'm not really seeing how your work in the marketing space connected with these 16 publications. How did those go hand in hand?
The one overlap is we didn't have a corporate blog. So we're ArtMap Inc. Let's make something. Oh, the domain Art Plus Marketing is available. And then we're like, what do we put on our corporate blog? Well, let's just invite the best people to publish on it.
Okay.
And then we ended up publishing all these creative professionals, marketing professionals, artists, and see what the name would attract.
So it was, were you trying to attract people who were trying to market their own companies with their own content?
Yeah, well, we just knew every site has a blog. We didn't have one. So we kind of came in pretty naive. And then, the other thing to consider, in the back of my head, I'm looking at okay, if I'm growing a business, what are my assets? Okay, if I have a marketing firm, basically the assets are the people. So this thing, the only way it can get big is if I employ a lot of people and I sell it to somebody else. Or I just have I get my hourly rate up to $3,000 an hour. And I become such a rare expert that I get this rate of $3,000 an hour. So all these labor-based businesses, it's you do them, it's better to do labor to learn that you can do something that's not labor than to do labor for the sake of, to grow this business, you just need to employ more labor and try and get the margin between what you bill and what you pay lower or bigger.
Yeah, it's just not as scalable.
Yeah, so that was just frustrating with me about my business after I went through, the first couple customers. It was just how can this thing get bigger and better? And the need is you need to own your own channels and own your own media, and that opens up a lot of doors for how do we be a small, super efficient company with a large voice versus a lot of people that their voice will keep varying in size because we don't have our own channels, and we have to build up these channels every single time for each new customer, which was cool to start getting some things repeating and see the patterns of how to get a site from 0 to 10 and 10 to 20. But it's much easier if your site's already at 60 and you're trying to go to 70. Or maybe not easier, but you're deeper into the problem and the problem's more interesting.
Yeah. This is, now we're going into the territory where I'm just intrinsically fascinated because this is a theme that has been coming up over and over again as I've been doing these podcasts. This idea of kind of being your own platform, having your own connections, operating your own network. So let's talk about that. And I know that that's sort of intimately wed with kind of some of the recent moves in Hacker Noon away from Medium and towards your own independent platform. So I also want to talk about sort of the reasoning that was behind that. So first of all, how difficult did you find it was? I guess I'm wondering, you had these 16 publications. Did Hacker Noon just obviously take off as the one that was attracting the most people, or was that directed on your part?
Whatever worked, we fed more. So it became clear early that a few of them were duds, and they weren't going to grow very much. But it wasn't just we had another one called Extra Newsfeed, and we'd published some famous novelists, we had published some famous New York cartoonists and stuff like that, and we had good grasp, but it was the traffic from Extra Newsfeed was very up and down. It was just viral. The whole site was depending on virality, and virality is random. Not quite random. You can increase your odds from random, truly random. You can increase your odds, but you can't build expertise and site authority as you can when you focus on a subject matter and where expertise is so valuable, like in technology, how to build things, how to make things, why things are trending. That stuff builds on each other, and the more we publish about JavaScript, the more the next person who publishes on JavaScript is helped because of the community behind it. And I also got personally jaded from because Extra Newsfeed had a lot of political stuff on it. A lot of satire, which initially I found hilarious and very funny, and it was a really nice part of my day to read it. And then the more politics became what politics are, the less I wanted to spend time on it. And the less I wanted to spend time on it, the less everyone else spent time on it. And the site just kind of didn't die, but just kind of went down, and now the contributors run it, and it's like kind of it's almost like a support group at this point of like political satire. But Hacker Noon, it was the best early, and we kept feeding it, and it clearly, like, you know, I think even when the other ones, even when we were still putting resources into the other publications, they peaked at like 2 million page views a month, and Hacker Noon was at 8. So it was still 20% of our portfolio was like these fringe sites.
Yeah.
And you know, Hacker Noon was the thing that worked. You know, you try 50 things so one works. When it works, don't abandon it.
How did you get the first contributors to Hacker Noon?
So I had a co-founder, Jay, and me, who were both background in technology. So we knew tons of people in tech that were already writing a lot of blog posts. So say, hey, republish your post here too. Or here's another outlet for you. Then we also recruited around the web, including from Medium. They used to have a request a story function a few years ago that allowed contributors to control and choose where they wanted to publish.
Is it not there anymore? You said
No, it's been dead for a while because they don't want people to publish on other sites like mine and or other sites around the web. So they've become a little more competitive and just a little different company than they used to be.
Okay. And then Medium, was Hacker Noon on Medium from the get-go?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so, well, we were on medium.com/hackerdaily. Then they used their content management system for other domains, and we moved it to hackernoon.com in April 2016. So the majority of the life we've been living on hackernoon.com.
Okay. And you had mentioned earlier that you hadn't thought through carefully your decision to put your publication on Medium. What would be your advice to others who are thinking about starting a publication on what to consider when they're thinking about WordPress and Medium? What do you wish you had thought through?
To be honest, I wouldn't have changed much because when I started working with them, they were a different company. It was 80% different employees. They had different objectives. They wanted everyone to build their own sites. They wanted to empower this whole generation of new publications that could compete with WordPress. So in terms of looking back and what advice I give myself differently, maybe just prepare for them to do different things than what they said they would do sooner. You know, because I started doing that, seeing how they were changing their behavior and just being different. But in terms of someone starting a publication today, there's always going to be a trade-off between what initial work do you need to do to build, and then what initial work to build a community. So the simplest path to growing a community is using the existing tools and existing channels. So, you know, you want to have a large Facebook group or a Facebook page, a large Twitter community. You know, those things, like, you can start getting your content out right now. You can sign up to Hootsuite, schedule your next 1,000 tweets, and tell a full story of why decentralization is happening. And you can do that without doing any infrastructure work, any software work, any design work, and only you writing and having a channel. So, like, but at the end of that day, it goes great, and you have 100,000 followers on Twitter, and you have none of their email addresses. You know, how good is your community? You know, how much can you say to them, hey, Twitter's actually screwing me, what should I do? Not much. You know, once that happens, your tweet's going to get hidden, your whole community's going to get divided, it's going to change. So you have to be realistic. You're starting a publication now, you have to be realistic about what are your resources and where do you want to spend them, and where do you want to spend them over what time. Because if you want WordPress or another content management system, which is, if you want to be big, you need to, that's the minimum. I went even further. I was like, after over relying on Medium, I'm building my own whole content management system. And maybe some people would argue I went too extreme and I tried to build too much software, but to me, it was the right choice because I'm doing something bigger now. I know what works with content management system. I know where we're wasting time in our content management system now. I know how to cut those things out, or at least I think I do. We'll see if they're true. So I think it was a smart move for me, and it was also smart because, you know, I raised $1 million from our readers, and I did equity crowdfunding, and I had the bandwidth to spend more money on software that I didn't have before. Creating 2 software development jobs, you know, you're talking about 10, 12, 15K a month. You know, if you're going to do that from your revenue stream better be very good, and you're not going to kill any other jobs that are making the thing run. So
So how are you making money before? I want to talk a bit about sort of your departure from Medium. How were you making money when you were on Medium?
So we ran weekly sponsorship. So you got it from Sunday night 8 p.m. till Sunday night at 8 p.m. And at the top, it would be like Hacker Noon, sponsored by PubNub.
And was PubNub funneled to you from Medium?
No, we built our own sales team, but mostly the best thing to get customers was their employees were publishing on our site. So we've published 8,000 writers, a little in that range. So we have pretty much, I mean, you name a tech company, I can grab an employee that's published on our site. You know, so we, in that way, we're already kind of working for them, because a lot of times they're talking about things they're building. So, you know, you have this person at Amazon talking about it, now we're talking to AWS, or however the system works, you know, so that was, and then we allowed brands to publish on our site, and that's something we now charge for. So in the beginning, we gave it away, and we said, hey, brands, you can AngelList, you can republish your blog posts here. You know, this is another channel. Look how many readers we got. Compare it with your own site. Do the judgment for yourself. Keep publishing here. So that was kind of the decision we wanted them to make. And now it's a small fee if you're a brand and you want to publish. And that's the line we're drawing of humans free, brands pay. And that's kind of the, and then nonprofits and stuff like that will do exemptions, like, and you know, so what was the question?
Oh, good boy. Now let's see if I can remember. I was asking how you monetized on Medium. But now my understanding was that Medium was going to mess around with the way that you could monetize, and that was part of the reason.
Yeah, so they said, you know, so we're on hackernoon.com with Medium's content management system. It says Hacker Noon across the top. If I said Hacker Noon sponsored by PubNub, they said I can't do that anymore. And they drew a line of just like, hey, if you want a sponsorship on hackernoon.com, you can't do it. And I was like, well, right now the Medium logo's all over hackernoon.com, and they're sponsoring us with free technology and free hosting. And they had really no good answer for that, of why one sponsorship is allowed and one is not. And that's because they're pivoting as a company, and they want to do different things. So
why? Yeah, what's their reasoning in not wanting you to have sponsors?
They want to sell a subscription service on medium.com to medium.com, and they don't want to empower other sites to grow. That's really the core of this disagreement. It's just a different business interest where they used to want to empower a lot of sites, get a share of all the money all these other sites made, and build a whole better web, get this design all over in different places on the web. Now they want that web experience to be on medium.com, and any other site building like that, they want to shut down, essentially. So we're kind of like in this area of like past interest, you know? So
so they're moving away from scraping small amounts off the top of what you're making in revenue to now trying to create like a walled garden for all the content.
Anyone that pays them and nobody else.
But they're still planning on having it being user generated, right?
I don't know. There's user generated and they commission content. So I don't know if they're a publisher or platform. You'd have to ask them.
Yeah, it's just bizarre. It makes me think of like, maybe it's a fallacious comparison, but it would be like Wikipedia charging you to access content that they didn't create, even though it's just they did create the platform. I don't know. That's odd to me. So tell us a bit about then your decision to move off of Medium. I assume that...
So I didn't handle it great because I was content. I finally had built a solid revenue stream, work on curation, editing, distribution, site growth, and don't worry about the content management system and worry about my customers. And because the customer model was great because it just lasted Sunday to Sunday. So like... the incentives for them to drive more clicks wasn't really there. Like the impressions and the clicks just happened, and that was like the range, and I knew the percentage that would happen based on how much traffic I had. And we weren't looking to be this super high growth unicorn. We were like, oh, we create one job, now we create 2 jobs, now we create 3 jobs, and this is from the business itself. It's cash flow positive. But the move off, at first we panicked and we tried to sell the company. And we looked around the web and we see all these different solutions we could have, and we got a really low offer from Medium, then we got some more respectable offers that were closer to the value of the thing. But even then it was like, the writing is on the wall that the next step of Hacker Noon needs to be its own software. And no matter who owned it or what did it, if you wanted Hacker Noon to grow and you talked about it long enough and you just looked around at how this thing works and what it's dependent on and not dependent on, having its own software was the natural conclusion that pretty much everyone reaches in the long run. So we decided we're the best setup to do it. It's better for us to raise money than to sell it to someone else and have them do it because we know how we want to do it. So then we were at the point where the Medium dependency was either really good or really bad. People that love Medium were very interested in talking to us, but people that actually understood, I think actually understood how media was changing and how the use of the software was changing, knew that you have to build a software team and build a tech team. So with my wife, Ling, who's our chief operating officer, we decided to run an equity crowdfunding campaign. And we basically just put it atop our site. And we said, here's what we're going to build. Here's the problem we're having. Here's what we're going to build next. And this is where we think we can go. And it's a 120-page document on the internet, and the landing page is very long, has a video and stuff. And so we sold a decent portion of our company and raised a little over $1 million from 1,200 people. Then we hired...
That's so cool. That must feel good.
It did, yeah. I mean, it was a grind because it was like all the traffic was coming from our site, or most. It was our social media channels and our site. And so the funnel it's not like it happens all overnight. You see some other crowdfunding campaigns. I know Minds, and I talked to the Minds guys, and they helped me with mine a little bit. And their campaign...
Did Minds crowdfunds?
Yeah,
okay.
They did a different platform, but same idea, equity crowdfunding. But they did a lot more. Like they had some large people come in very early. And we didn't. We did get initialized capital that came in the first week, and they did the maximum amount for an equity crowdfunding, and they helped get it going. But it was like a lot of it was just every single day we're driving like 1,000 people to the page. Every single day from that 1,000, so many convert and hit the button, and then so many convert and pick the next thing. So it was like if you look at the rise, it's just like do. It's pretty much just steady and up and to the right. It's not like, oh wait, day over, fundraising gone.
Yeah.
Like it ended up lasting like 90 days, or something in that range. And it was pretty long.
There's something to be said for that linear kind of persistence that happens when you just have that steady flow of real readers.
Yeah.
So that's really neat. So tell me then about, you crowdfunded. What is the new vision? It sounds like Medium was in alignment with your kind of vision of what you wanted for the web and for media, and that's changed. So what should media look like in your opinion? So
where we're at in the landscape is a lot more, we're not trying to break news. We're trying to get experts to amplify their voice. So when people are doing cool things in technology, research papers at Stanford, for example, like that's an interesting thing for us to republish and get very smart people who are building related things to read. That's much more interesting to me than say, hey, we're going to cover the next round of Series B funding and try and break the story for someone else and live in this embargo land with reporters emailing back and forth, getting mad at each other for someone else breaking the embargo first. Like, that's totally not interesting.
Yeah.
It's just pretty boring. Like, I'd rather the moment someone raises $16 million, I'd rather they go onto Hacker Noon and have their CEO talk about their technology. Mm-hmm. That's a much more interesting story to me than the headline of raise 16 million from X, Y, and Z. So in terms of you look at in the personal landscape, it's pretty simple. You tell your own story on Facebook, you tell your own story on Twitter, you get it. You understand a reporter's not following you around looking to tell your story. So then what does that mean professionally? Well, professionally is always a little bit behind. B2B will always be a little bit behind B2C, and you'll see the way the consumers behave, and then you'll see the way they behave in their business. I think it works that way. Some people don't agree. They think businesses are so cutting edge. But that means, you're telling your own story on your corporate blog, you're telling your own story on your personal blog. Now you go out, you're telling your own story on LinkedIn Publisher, you're telling your own story on Medium, you're telling your own story on Hacker Noon. So that's where we live in this landscape. I'd rather get closer to expertise than getting closer to capturing someone's news and stealing their news moment. Mm-hmm. Let the other sites do that. Let them do it the way they want to do it. I'd rather get their expertise, and I'd rather them dig into why they're building what they're building or how they're building what they're building. And I think you look at how many technology professionals there are, every software developer can publish on Hacker Noon, every CEO can publish on Hacker Noon. I think for us, it's a more accurate way to reflect the tech industry by elevating 7,000 voices than trying to have 10 reporters chase the companies that those 7,000 voices work for.
So do you have to deal with people being concerned about like quality control? Because it sounds like you try to get as many people to publish as you can. Do you get pushback from some of your readers saying like, well, you shouldn't publish
Absolutely.
everyone?
We make mistakes. I mean, because when we were at 20, now we're at 25 stories a day, and we have 4 part-time staff editors, and I think the future of Hacker Noon is community editors. I think having the authority to, if you've written good stories on Bitcoin, having the authority to publish someone you know writing about Bitcoin is a natural extension that makes sense, and it's already like happening. Contributors, referring contributors is the best source. Just like in hiring, where it's like if you actually know someone and you're advising them to go to the site, like they know quality control. So now we open up user types in the new Hacker Noon where you can earn your way to publish other people.
Are you concerned at all with having community editors start to, I guess, bias the direction of what's being published on Hacker Noon?
Absolutely, yeah. And it's something that's always going to be a give and take, and we're not going to solve it with any one system.
Okay.
Like it's something that we have to identify on a use-by-use basis.
Do you have any ideas in place already for how to address that, or are you?
Some, but none are live, really. You know, right now it's much more the staff editors are trusted. When the staff editors make a mistake, we deal with it on a one-off basis. Going from staff to community, I'm talking something that's going to take years.
Yeah.
You know, having an actual system where the community can, because community editors on Wikipedia, you know, it's a much different challenge just because they have one tone, you know, and it's tone deaf. It's like supposed to be just a factual, it's an encyclopedia. Like if you do it well, it's tone deaf.
Yeah.
You know, like that's literally like execution. For us, that's like boring. You know, so there's going to be a balance between how extreme, and you know, so we're coming out with a help section, so help.hackernoon.com, where you know you can have more publicly available information on what's allowed and what's not allowed. And really the end game here is a governance. That it has to hit the point where, okay, in this type of dispute, these 5 people look around, or these community editors vote. So it's working its way towards a governance, but it starts with just like the most common use cases and how they're addressed.
But you identify kind of with the decentralized movement, if I'm not mistaken, right?
I mean, I love it. I think it's still 100 years away. Other people think it's 5.
Okay.
You know, so that's where I'm a little bit mainstream, which means like some of the mainstream people hate me, and then some of them think I'm like, some of the mainstream people think like I can decentralize this whole thing tomorrow. And it's like I wish I could. You know, it's just the technology's not there and the incentives aren't there, but I think it's where it's going, and that's why we publish so much about how to decentralize the web, and publish so much about how do we get banks out of our lives.
Yeah.
Like that's where I'm cutting out intermediaries and institutions that don't add real value is where I get personally so excited about the decentralized movement. Like some of the stuff that other people are excited about, I get it, but to me it's more like, can we cut out just the person who's skimming off the top? If we can have just exactly what we have now, but we cut off every person skimming off the top, how much more money do we have? How much more money does every single person involved in the system have? You know, because if you can do that, you have something, in my mind, a lot of these systems aren't evil, they're just self-interested. And they see a moment where they can cut off the top of 20,000 people or 20 million people, and it's like one decision, let's cut off the top of all those 20 million, and look how much, we got an extra 50 million.
Yeah.
You know, so it's not that they're evil, they're just self-interested just like us.
So do you see, I mean, you're talking about a system of governance. Do you see that as a means to an end, or is kind of governance your long-term goal? I'm thinking about this in the context of decentralization, because it seems like, yes, once you have governance, then you do start to get this self-interest involved. And so if you have community editors that build up so much trust with other community editors, then you might be looking at
there's going to be feuds. If people are involved and interest is involved, there are going to be feuds, and I'm okay with that. I mean, when I started this shift away from Medium and thinking about how would I build my ideal software, I mean, one of the things I've just always kept in mind is how do I make my job obsolete? Like, I think it is a good thing for a CEO to work towards them being completely obsolete and the whole system works without them. And this is why Bitcoin is so amazing and why sometimes you get a little skeptical that maybe the thing is too perfect and it was a marketing campaign to have the person at the top be completely anonymous. It's such a good metaphor for how decentralization can actually work. You know, that like the idea of coming up with it, that person is a far better marketer than me. Like, even if he never had a marketing job or anything in his life, he understood one simple truth of how to make it much bigger was to completely cut off his head. And that was a very smart decision. So governance, I would like the system to be good enough that it doesn't need me to resolve itself. And when it has a problem, it can solve the problem and move on.
Yeah. Well, I think one good check on the system that you've mentioned to me is this idea that you're empowering these calls to action for individual writers and for creating their own distribution network. So can you tell people a little bit about what I'm talking about? First of all, just describe it. And secondly, your vision for why you're doing that and like theoretically what the purpose is and where it should go.
Yeah, so everyone that publishes on Hacker Noon, they own their own content. And they give us a non-exclusive license to edit and distribute it. And ideally, we just distribute and the content's good enough that we don't need editors. Editors are to raise the quality. So at that moment, you know, you look at someone owning their own content should publish many places. Just as whenever you do a blog post, you tweet it, you go to Facebook. Now, how do you get it into more sites and more communities? You know, one way is to republish on a site like Hacker Noon. And then now that you own your content, what we've been doing to date is at the bottom of every post, we'll let them control whatever call to action they want. So now that we're designing it, we're putting it into their own software. So at the top of it, it's, you know, author David Smooke, call to action here, buy a top navigation sponsorship from Hacker Noon in my case. In your case, maybe more sell your book, hire my firm, use my software, demo my software, whatever you know, maybe contribute to my open source project. You know, whatever the call to action you want the rest of the internet to take should be atop your content. That's the simple realization of just talking to a lot of contributors, you know, because saying it goes on my site and you get paid an unknown amount at a later date, or you get paid no amount at a later date, isn't that interesting to me. And I think what a lot of top tech professionals want isn't that. What a lot of top tech professionals want is they want to use the internet to drive to one or two actions that they want people on the internet, relevant people on the internet to take. And so we want to help them do that and help their content do that. And we think a lot of others, it's a lot of the reason they're already contributing to Huffington Post, Business to Community, these other, you know, older contributor sites. So we want to just put that front and center, get them to read more of their stories on Hacker Noon, and then drive the traffic out to the actual thing they want out, as opposed to, hey, we're going to put your little Facebook logo and your little Twitter logo, and on those two little icons, one person's going to click, and then they're going to realize they don't want to friend you on Facebook because that's weird because you've never met.
Yeah.
You know, so I think that's something that's pretty simple that we can just use the content to help them more, and that's something that I want to get towards.
Yeah. So I think a lot of times some of these more centralized services hesitate to do that because they're worried that that's going to lump off part of their readership or their own metrics. So
and they should be, because it will.
Yeah. So how do you address that? Why are you not concerned? Or do you just think there's a higher good here that needs to be served?
I mean, it starts with the model. Each page view I make money on. If there's a sponsor on every single page, every eyeball that's on there is making me money. You're reading the content here, and then you go over there to finalize your decision on demoing their software, which isn't my business. You know, so I've already made money in the transaction. I'm already hosting your content for long-term traffic, and I know how to use that content to get more long traffic for the whole group.
But isn't if other people, like let's say that I'm contributing a lot to Hacker Noon, I've collected a lot of email addresses and I have my own newsletter now, and at some point I either stop contributing to Hacker Noon or my readers don't actually go straight to Hacker Noon, they just are going to my email list. That means that those readers aren't actually making Hacker Noon money anymore because they're not
in that
seeing
case,
sponsorship.
yeah, we could definitely, but for that time period, all the time you spent with Hacker Noon, we already made money.
Yeah.
And you drove some of your audience to Hacker Noon. and
Yeah.
some of those audience will continue reading
Will
Hacker
stay.
Noon.
Yeah.
So it's a trade-off where we're cross-pollinating.
Yeah.
I'm sure there has been and there will be cases where the other side gets more, and there'll be cases where I get more, and hopefully,
Yeah.
you find that balance. I mean, at the end of the day, the contributor can take their content out of Hacker Noon if they don't like it.
Yeah.
If I'm not helping you, you shouldn't publish with me.
Yeah.
Like, there's plenty of places to publish around the web. You can build your own site pretty quickly. So it's a trade-off where the key is the contributor owns all their own content. This is actually very groundbreaking, and the more what ownership means, the deeper you go, the harder it is. And on this case, I always come back to Facebook of like, you post on Facebook, you get 103 likes and 25 comments. You export your data, you don't get those likes and those comments. So
Yeah.
now it's like, did you own it? Or they're saying the network effect actually created those 103 likes and those 25 comments? The network effect does nothing without the initial story. You know, so this model that like, hey, you can always export your content to the point of it working. You can export it enough that it can't be imported into a Facebook competitor. That's the level that they all operate under. So they can say you can export your data at any time, and you can export some form of data at any time, but what you actually get isn't enough to use the data and plug into a different service and get the utility value.
Yeah. And do you think that there is a future in which that is possible?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, but I do think in this one I may be a little too radical, that I think it's going to be the government that's going to open this up. I look at this next generation of tech companies more like what happened to AT&T will happen to Facebook, as opposed to saying a distributed service will get good enough soon enough that they can get to 1 billion users. Like, and I know that's not really the number that that's bigger number than most people are talking about, but if decentralized internet is real, it's more like looking at getting towards Facebook numbers than it is getting towards a normal viral app number. But to me, that'll be more like, okay, the shift has happened.
So as you're running Hacker Noon, what are sort of the long-term visions? You've just come out of this period where you've shifted off of Medium, and that's a lot, and I'm sure that that's consumed all of your time and attention lately. But is there any kind of long-term vision for how you might pivot or develop your business once you get on your feet in this new?
There's a lot of ways it could go. So like, I get a little skeptical of people saying, we're this for that or we're that for this, and like saying their long-term is too set. Because I'm much more someone that like iterates, sees what works, and then does it 100 times, and then iterate and see what works and does it 100 times, or has someone else do it 1,000 times. But we want to be the best place for tech professionals to publish. I think right now stories are kind of split up between personal blogs, LinkedIn, Medium, contributor networks, all this like Forbes, HBR, that type of stuff. So I think having kind of a place where you trust that like these are the smartest tech professionals publishing their stories, and then at that point it opens up doors of like, you have the market network route of being more like LinkedIn for tech professionals. Kind of boring, but definitely possible, and getting more money in the recruiting space. Also kind of boring, but you see other sites are doing it that are similar to me or have some similarities. The other route is this software works, and we give it away or sell it, and now there's thousands of sites that work like Hacker Noon does. That's one way. Or, the highest ceiling way in terms of like money to the company is every single contribution on Hacker Noon is tied to a currency, and then you earn currency based on your past and your future work on Hacker Noon, and someday Hacker Noon now lists that coin on exchanges and goes across, and you have the Hacker coin or the Hacker Noon coin.
Tokenify it.
Yeah, and I mean it's so many people fail doing it, but it is a real thing of like, if the currency has a value and you can measure contribution to currency appropriately, now you get in a spot where you're creating all the incentives to go towards the right direction of more traffic, more words, more reading time. Because it is cool to think about like, if you can truly design your own system, if you can get to the point where your incentives aren't gamed, you have a really cool thing. So that's something, but it's like everything we're doing now, our software challenge is it's so much user experience based. And that's where we have to start. Like the idea that a lot of these contributors, when we were like, are moving off, they're like, immediately go to cryptocurrency and have everything you write, every word is tied to an amount that you can earn a coin, or every minute reading someone, you can actually earn an attention token, like BAT and these other people that are trying for it.
Yeah.
But it's just the amount of technical challenges that you go into it for one day and you can come out the other side. Like, by the time we even get to the user experience, it's going to be 2025.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're kind of in, you're a very influential person, positionally at least, because you're sort of you have information about meta networks at this point. You're telling me that you have ties to a lot of companies that have an employee that blogs on your website. That kind of makes you a superpower in some ways. And
my daughter doesn't think so.
She doesn't think so. Why not?
I don't know. She just doesn't care about the internet. So she's 2.
Yeah. She'll learn in a couple of years to care about it.
Do we want her to, though?
I think if we don't get our kids to care about the internet, we're probably
irresponsible.
Yeah.
It's like teaching them
it's like the necessary evil.
It is.
But anyway, so you sort of are like in this superpowered position. How are you planning on using that personally, if at all?
Editorial and judging what's next is a lot of authority in that way, and
yes.
Trying to I want to get more artificial intelligence stories. I want to get more decentralized stories. I want to get more examples of people that are really just hustling, like people that didn't get to where they're getting from connections, and then they rise up, and that's a voice we really want to amplify. So the closer we get to an editorial line by merit, and merit of content and merit to the technology industry. Mm-hmm. So it's not enough to say because they're famous they should be amplified. Mm-hmm. Like that mindset is not good, but it's something that happens every time someone famous joins Twitter, their handle just happens to be available.
Yeah.
Every time someone famous joins Twitter, it's just like this thing happens and they're in the select section and suddenly they grow very quickly, and it's like the whole thing is extracting their community. Tom Brady joins Twitter. We want all of Tom Brady's fans to now comment with Tom Brady on Twitter using Twitter. So the moment Tom Brady joins Twitter, that's a great growth day at Twitter. They're all there celebrating because they get all these new users because Tom's fans all come in. So that it's a cool effect in terms of growth. It's a less cool effect in terms of do we want to be amplifying Tom Brady's voice?
Yeah.
Maybe, but maybe not. That decision just never is crossing their minds. That's not how their growth strategy works.
So you actually, just a couple of minutes ago, were leading in perfectly to my next question, because I wanted to ask, you are at this really unique vantage point where you can speak to the future. And one of the things I like to talk about on this podcast is where people think things are going based on their vantage point. So you mentioned AI, you mentioned decentralization. Can you talk about those or anything else? What is your panoramic view of where tech is going?
So on the AI side of things, being David in messages and communication, the technology's almost already there. There's liability issues, but in terms of dealing with not low level, but people I haven't met emailing me, why can't an AI handle that? The moment I decide scheduling, AI should be able to handle that. Never does. It's still me, it's still going on. But it's that level of interaction is getting closer to how do I scale myself, and AI can start to do that. And that Black Mirror episode with AI where they build an AI just...
Black Mirror. This show comes up so much.
They build an AI just to optimize your home.
Okay.
And the idea is you know your home best. So if you make an AI that knows everything you know, and it just serves hey, when does milk arrive? And all this small stuff, it's the best. But I see it more in AI, I'm really excited for extending messaging, to some level of honesty, or realizing when I need to step in and when, hey, that's how I handle that message every time, that type of deal. But also measuring the quality of stories and measuring inbound submissions, so right now you can do reading quality, you can do number of words, time written, you can look at all the links, you can do plagiarism tests, you can do some basic stuff, but getting to the level of like, can I have an AI read a story and it project how many people will want to read the story? That's something that like we could totally work on, and we could work on today. We can't solve it today, but we can get closer to it. And then the AI writing stories is getting a little scary. Like
scary good or scary what?
Scary just in terms of like, will humans write? Like, is there a world where AI gets so good humans don't see the point in writing? So I think with like baseball stories in other sports, AI can get good because there's just not that many variations. Like when someone goes up to bat, they're getting a single, a double, a triple, they're striking out, or they're getting hit by a pitch, and then there's 10 different sentence variations for each one.
Yeah.
So that level of writing it can kind of do. But I also get scared for like, will the next generation only be friends with AI? Like you see these 5 and 6 year olds talking to Alexa, and you're like, I don't think that's healthy.
Yeah.
But I mean, then on the other side of it, when I was 5 and 6, if someone said to me, you could have a robot friend, I'd be like, cool. Move out of the way, mom and dad.
Yeah, I can get on board with that. So, as you're talking about this, it makes me wonder, often when people talk about AI taking over work, my thought, and this could be
yeah, it's real.
Yeah, it could be a little controversial, I guess, but my thought is always like, okay, well, I mean, it's just going to push the margin of what types of work we do, so that we're constantly on the margin of what AI hasn't quite figured out yet, and kind of helping guide AI along. And I've never thought about that in the context of...
I mean, with us already being in technology, I believe that's true. And we're going to scale ourselves more. But for the people that aren't in technology, for the jobs that are actually replaced, I mean, the skills gap, the training gap, the amount they have to do to get the AI to work for them. And then when AI makes breakthroughs, the way it's set up now is it's going to be the large company makes the breakthrough, then they're going to implement it, across all these different situations. And the person that feels the breakthrough is not going to reap the benefits.
Yeah.
I think you see a lot of wealthy people in Silicon Valley trying to get ahead of it with OpenAI, and putting all this money towards AI, and just they're planning the story 20 years early that they're on the good side of it. And whether that OpenAI did enough to actually change this or other AI initiatives, some of it doesn't even matter. Like, they've already planted the story, they've already planted the seed, and it's going to keep working.
Yeah, so I think that those are good points. What I was trying to say is I think that it could be interesting. One of the things I've never thought about before is, like, in the context of language, maybe there's also this margin that humans can help direct an AI towards chasing. Like, maybe there is a type of language that AI has, like, as language develops, there's still a type of writing that can't be completed by AI, since language isn't itself static, and types of slang and types of verbiage that AI might always trail behind, in the same way that AI might always trail behind technology as it develops. And that's not, like, typically, yes, I've always in the past thought about AI as being able to replace a lot of like manual labor type jobs or writing type jobs. But maybe there will always be sort of this margin that AI pushes us to ourselves as humans develop new ways of movement that AI hasn't been able to capture yet. Does that make sense? It's kind of a weird thought, and I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think the originality and the creativity of humans cannot be truly replaced. The humans are humans for a reason, and as far as I know, I'm not artificial intelligence, so that part is cool and good. It's just the people at the top are going to have different interests, and they're going to look at the numbers much differently as like, hey, if I can...
You mean the people who own the AI?
The people who just own businesses. So at the top, you're saying who's going to implement AI. I think a lot of those decisions are going to be much more like, hey, we can cut 100 laborers and have 10. And AI will do the work of 90, and those last 10 will do all the fine-tuning.
Fine-tuning,
Yeah, and that's something that, like, I think will be happening. That's why I started with baseball stories, because recapping a baseball game is pretty low level writing.
Right.
But it's still writing a lot of people read, and it's still more useful than a box score, and you can have a way to explain a box score. I mean, I remember working on R in college, and R would spit out these massive reports, and they would put language to explain the numbers that they have, and there it was much more like, just fitting it in and like Control F type of level of technology.
Yeah.
But the idea is still the same, that like stories can be told more and more often. Machines are going to be the ones telling the story.
Yes. So let's backtrack a bit. So future of AI, it seems like the immediate stuff that's going to be most practical is almost not exactly personal assistance, but as you called it, scaling the self. I think that is really cool. I've never used that language before, but I think that's a good point. That there are just some basic ways that us humans might feel more comfortable with AI auto-replying to certain things for us. And that seems like a basic kind of next direction. You also mentioned decentralization. So tell me a little bit more about your perspective on that and where that is going, since you also previously said you think that's more of a 100-year long-term game.
Yeah, and it means something different to everybody. I mean, where we're at right now is too much of the internet is owned by far too few people, because the internet is growing because so many people are putting their content, their voice into it. But how much of it is owned? I mean, if the internet was America, and then you had like all the 5 or 6 large companies, the rest of America is owning like Portland, Maine, and the rest of it will be Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Google. And that's even with all this money flowing into startup technology. It's just the graph itself is so skewed towards a few companies that it just can't, you can't have a sustainable, it's an oligarchy. It's entering this area where it's just not a healthy economy for most of the participants in it. So I think that is going to be a breaking point. And I think the governments, you're already seeing the EU being a little more forward with GDPR, handing out billion-dollar fines to Facebook and Google, and the stock still goes up whenever they report their quarterly earnings, because they have so many other streams. And so really, it would be better if there were competitive technologies that were decentralized, and you could just take your information from Facebook and plug it in, or you could just take your information from Twitter and plug it in. But I think it's just a harder barrier than the government actually breaking them up. So those two things, maybe they happen at the same time. Maybe because it's going to take, to move people in power to not be in power takes a lot of things happening at the same time and pushing a lot of forces the same direction. It's not, if one person could do it, it would have already happened. It's going to take a lot of a perfect storm type of situation to open up this landscape of, hey, technology is something that democratizes access. It's not something that blocks off ways to make money for most of the population. So I think in the end, what technology inherently is will help the people rise up more than it'll keep them down.
Okay. And what about anything else? Do you see anything else as being kind of the next steps or big movements that could happen?
I'm definitely excited to not pay the banks. I know we've talked about this a little bit already.
Yeah.
I mean, anyone who's skimming money off the top, I'm just excited to not work with them.
Yeah.
So I don't know exactly what that means in terms of it.
Yeah, it seems like decentralization, a biggie for decentralization will just be taking a lot of these common services like Uber, Airbnb, TaskRabbit even, and just being like, it's not that hard to cut out the middleman here once we have these decentralized
with those
protocols.
ones, a lot of those, the middleman is the leads. And that is hard to get, So the reason people are going with Airbnb and TaskRabbit is the leads. They're available to work today. They're available to rent out their house today. They don't have the whole infrastructure to just have all these inbound leads coming all the time. And
but
the
isn't
moment you
that
lock
somewhat, to create a decentralized marketplace doesn't seem like it's that difficult. Am I missing something?
I wish more existed, so we're obviously missing something. Why isn't there a competitive Airbnb?
Yeah. Well, okay. So shout out to ourselves then here at Era. I'm going to shamelessly plug us here. We're building a decentralized marketplace for these kinds of things and have some kind of fun new ideas in mind. But yeah, I think that it is fairly trivial. The hardest part is building up that network. And I think companies like Facebook and Twitter and probably Uber, they haven't had to directly face this yet, and Medium know that they want a like to stay in their system, and they want a heart or a tweet or whatever to stay in their system as much as possible, because if you can somehow create a network off of their platform, which is really the only unique piece well, I shouldn't say the only unique piece, but a very important piece to these platforms are sort of the contact lists that are created.
I mean, the encouraging thing here is they've given us all the model, and they show us how the growth side of the network has happened.
Yeah.
So there is, like, not that you can do it, but you can see the way it's been done before, and say you do have a decentralized Airbnb and you want to get enough leads, you can follow the growth path of Airbnb. So that side of it is very encouraging to me. That but then you're going to come back to problems they've had of how to make money. And is your model sustainable enough? If you're getting 100,000 places rented out around the world, and then you're making $10, your system may die.
Well, that's the challenge always with these decentralized or open source kind of movements is, monetization is a biggie. And that's, I think, the only thing really keeping these sorts of developments at bay. I think that Facebook and Google and these other big tech companies are kind of riding on the wave of self-interest, that everybody is self-interested because our economics right now,
we're in America.
It incentivizes hoarding rather than sharing. Let's put it that way.
That's kind.
So yeah. So all right, well, cool. And so last kind of question in looking towards the future that I'm interested in is your thoughts on media, since you are in media. Do you think that established media is dying or changing? What's kind of next in the world of media?
I mean, it's a pretty wild time because, the social networks are still controlling so much of the news. And now the social networks are hiring editorial people, but they're not publications and they don't want to be taxed or
So what do you mean
treated as such.
they're hiring editorial people? What do they do?
You're going to have to ask them, but, they're looking, I mean, they have the low-level people who are basically red flagging and curating bad news from being amplified, and then you have the mid-level people that are actually trying to determine what trends and look at that. And Facebook had a whole trending section and got a lot of backlash, and these companies are just in a very tough spot because they go into one room and they argue they're a social network, they go into another room and they argue they're a publication. And it just depends on what legal battle and what story they're trying to tell at the time, and really they just want to ride both. And they don't want to say, hey, we're just editorial, or hey, we're just a social network. And now at the same time, you have so many people getting their news from the social networks, so there's always a filter on every single thing they get. So that's extremely frustrating, and I'm becoming more and more bullish on old ways of the internet. Emails, forums. We set up our own forum at community.hackernoon. Forums. Who would have thought, making a big comeback? But it's a real thing, because that's how what people do when they first get a new technology, a lot of times that's what they do once the technology is matured too. They actually made the right decision in the beginning. The cool thing is I can go on a forum and I can talk to anyone else who's building a remote control helicopter. Couldn't do that before if I was building a remote control helicopter before forums. So there's cool things that sometimes people were right in the early days. And the idea of centralizing all sources of the internet into your one news feed and then try and trust that the news feed knows you well enough and knows itself well enough that it's going to curate content that you like, it's not going to work, so unless maybe you design your newsfeed yourself. So I think we're going to have a lot more publications emerging, a lot more direct interaction with the readership. There's so many URLs out there, there's so many ways that you could interact. It's a hard challenge because the social networks are better at making things sticky. They've won the software design challenge. Facebook knows you need your first 10 friends to continue using Facebook. They're going to encourage everything in the beginning. Sign up, you can learn so much about software. Just sign up for Facebook for the first time. Literally just try it again and see what they do and see all these actions they want you to take in the beginning. Every single one is designed for you to stay there for 10 years. And they're trying to get you to hit these different milestones that know you stay. And it's a great lesson in UX, and it's also a great lesson in hey, maybe you shouldn't be the one doing this. Maybe other people should take these learnings and put it onto their own site. And I hope we live in more of a world where people are like, these are my 15 favorite sites, and I get my own curation, and I look off and they can have sites from all over the place, and it's a mix of Twitter feed, Facebook pages. It's not just go to Facebook and get your news. That's where, like, really the entire Facebook changed the history of this country. You know, that's how important they are as a technology company and a voice and a source of news, trusted or not trusted, or how much we do trust news and how much we trust stories. So I think media is going to be a lot more sites emerging and independent sites. I think it's too consolidated now. And I say all this knowing the most likely end path for my company is being scooped up by a larger company. And that's how media works, and it consolidates, and we've already had offers. It's something that media, more than other industries, they understand. You can get deep in trying to figure out why stories emerged or did not emerge, or went viral or did not go viral, and how competitors become friends, and like it just gets pretty messy, you know. This one, I don't know why this came to mind, but the New York Times, one of their biggest moneymakers of the last few years was actually investing in Indeed. There's like weird circles of media that now, like, is the media a venture capital firm? And is that the best route for a media to grow? And then what is the self-interest?
Yeah, that seems...
It gets pretty, some of that gets pretty ugly, because it's like people don't understand how to capitalize on attention. So attention becomes this weird thing where the advertising model doesn't work. The reader doesn't want to pay for it. And if the reader does want to pay for it, like, it's because it's hit a tipping point of enough goodwill, because they believe they can usually get the content elsewhere, but they want to pay for it for the sake of, like, they really trust you and they want you to continue to grow. Which, if that's the case, they should be a shareholder, and they should trust that the company is going to grow more, and they should be rewarded for their thing.
Yeah, that's so...
You know, that's where, like, funded by readership, I think, is good. You know, the readership is saying, hey, this is my product roadmap, this is my plan. Do you not want to just get this content for free? But if I make money on it, do you want to make money on it? That's true alignment of interest. And that's why I'm still excited. Like, there can be sites like Hacker Noon that are fully tokenized. And I think that's totally within the realm of me or someone else to do in 2 or 3 years. You know, I think it's still very tough, because the gaming incentives are very tough. And you're going to have to go through a million rounds of game theory to get to the point where the incentives are close to right.
Right.
And you could get it wrong enough to kill your whole site in the meantime.
There's a lot in there. There's a lot in what you just said. And I only recently have been learning a little bit about PR firms and how a lot of these tech startups they get venture capital funding, and then they have to go hire a PR firm, because otherwise they can't.
Have to.
Well,
yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, okay. Explain that. What do you mean by your...
I mean, well, in this...
Your quote.
Yeah, the PR firm, I mean, they do a good PR firm, they're making introductions and they're setting meetings. That's like the core, and then they're crafting your story. That part of it, if the firm knows who they are, the PR firm should be less involved. I mean, I understand the idea of paying for meetings. Like, it's hard to go out and get cold meetings. It's hard to get meetings with the people you want to meet with. If I can pay someone to get the right meetings, that totally makes sense. But paying someone to craft your story, negotiate with a friend, get the story placed on a site, like...
Is that what's going on with PR firms?
Oh yeah, that's happening all the time. You know, some of it's relationship based, some of it is just, I mean, a good PR professional can also place stories without being relationship based. They tell a good story in the email, they make a good pitch, they make a good longer form, they convince them the meeting is worth taking, or they provide the right quote. And those things are needed. Someone has to message someone else if they have any interest in getting written about, like, that's not organic. But I mean, the best is definitely organic, telling your story, getting other people to talk about your story, and that's much more exciting for rising up. Like, this is where podcasts are very exciting as well. As you know, I mean, you see Spotify buying up podcast companies left and right. You see Apple, like, so casual on their market stranglehold, and Luminary raising $100 million, and their big offering is 40 original podcasts. It's like, you raised $100 million and you produce 40 podcasts. Like, is that really like a big offering? But it is, because they're putting a bunch of new gated content behind the wall, and the podcast medium, it allows a lot of smart people who get very self-conscious about writing to get their voice out there. So, you know, you see people get less self-conscious about writing, But this also, for Hacker Noon, it was so important to grow because the tech professional's so used to the keyboard. They're just so used to it that, like, if I say to them, spend an hour on the keyboard just sharing what you just built this week, it's actually an interesting blog post that a lot of other people in tech are going to want to read. But, other industries aren't like that. They're not addicted to the keyboard like technology professionals are for the most part. So the rise of so for me, that was very good for getting a lot more content. But if you want to cover other industries, I would think podcasts are going to rise a little faster, and they've also risen fast in technology, so it's not like they're slow there, but it's just another way for people to be more comfortable telling their story and telling, because if you just say something related to what you're working on, you're able to go into detail in it. Anyone else working on something related, if they can just find that thing, there's going to be a lot of value gained.
Yeah. Okay.
So people telling their own stories. We want to level that up by about 100x. And let the rich people deciding what stories should trend try and slow that down.
So how would you advise? You have a good background in marketing and all these other routes of wisdom that you've gained just through your own network. What would you advise to people who are entering tech? Maybe they're doing their own startup. How do they compete with companies like Facebook that have had the resources and the time to become incredibly sticky? And also then sort of the behind the scenes stuff that's going on with PR firms and just friendships that are influencing what gets published.
If you're going to compete with Facebook, pick something absolutely tiny. Compete with them on one simple tiny thing of you could actually be better than them. That's a much better route than trying to go after these giants from the up top and trying to say we're going to replace everything that you're using Facebook for. That's just so much software, that's so much network effect, that's so much brand equity. You just can't really do it overnight. Even I bring up Luminary on the podcast, only the people in tech know about them. They're advertising all over Instagram. They're probably spending thousands upon thousands a day doing that and they're just burning their venture capital into ads, which is like probably not a great use. I mean, it happens a lot, and it's not that advertising isn't helpful. But I mean, competing on the smallest actual function you can compete on is what I love, because then it's something you actually can be better, and you're that function specific, and then you can land and expand and get bigger and take on more of them. I mean, in terms of the PR stuff, the good thing is most of the job that they do is not that hard. You just have to consistently email, consistently follow up, make your pitches better and better. And if you know your product, you should get closer to making your pitches better and better. And you see people make the pitch 100 times, like early on in the pitch what they're reacting and not reacting to. And you can just see it on them. And then from there, you get better at it. So the PR stuff I wouldn't be that concerned about if I'm a young startup. But it's also something where you're a young startup, you're pouring everything into it, and you believe this thing should be big. You're always going to believe you don't get enough coverage. So if I were you, I would sit you down and just be like, dude, patience. Don't worry about getting too much coverage right now. It will happen or it won't. Or maybe your idea isn't as good as you think it is, but dedicating some time to telling your story outside the work you're doing is important. So if you're able to structure your day 7 hours of work, 2 hours of outreach, and then, 1 hour is sales outreach, 1 hour is story outreach and marketing outreach. So it's getting that as part of your routine, because a lot of especially the really technical engineers, they think they shouldn't be doing that part of the job. Really, if you're in a startup, I mean, a lot of it comes down to selling and making. You make something, you sell it. You make something, you sell it. You sell something, you make it. You make something, you sell it. And that cycle just keeps repeating. If you make it and you can't talk about selling it, you need a much bigger team. You're incapable of working on a 3-person team if you're on the team and you can't sell it at all. You should probably work on a bigger team at that point. So I wouldn't be that worried about. And plus, I think with the internet being a lot more people telling their own stories professionally, and that happening more and more, I think the PR firms are going to help out there. And they're emailing me all the time, and the end solution is adding the CEO as a contributor and getting their story reviewed. And that's a common practice where it's just I don't want to hear your pitch. No, I don't. No, I don't. Get it to the point where someone on your team is submitting. Okay, now we'll have an editor review. So on my end of it, that's how I kind of avoid the problem. I push them to the solution I want, which is the leaders telling their own story on my site.
Very cool. Well, David, thank you so much. I've really had fun in this conversation. There's been a lot of pieces of wisdom that I've personally taken an interest in, and kind of in the spirit of everything you're standing for, hopefully other people out there are going to take an interest in it too.
Well, thanks for publishing on Hacker Noon. I'm
Yeah,
really happy
I love
to do
it.
this.
I love it. It's a treat every time. So, thanks.
Thank you.